Ethan Calder didn't realize the beginning of the end of his marriage would sound like an ordinary sentence spoken between bites of cereal. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no messages discovered, no lipstick on collars. Just a child saying something he wasn't supposed to understand. And once Ethan heard it, he couldn't unheard it. For almost 3 years, he had loved his wife without hesitation. Completely. The way practical men love, not through poetry or big gestures, but through consistency. Showing up, paying bills on time, fixing what breaks, building something stable enough that nobody has to worry. That had always been his definition of love. His name was Ethan Calder. He was 41 and owned 2 commercial refrigeration service companies on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. Not glamorous work. Restaurants didn't call you because things were going well. They called when thousands of dollars of food were hours away from spoiling. Pressure was normal to him. He had started with 1 used van and a loan his older brother told him not to take. 9 years later, he had 14 employees, 3 service vehicles, and contracts with half the independent restaurants in the county. He wasn't wealthy, but he was solid, and solid had always been enough. When he married Rachel, he knew she wasn't starting from zero. She had a 5-year-old son, Tyler. Quiet kid, watchful. The kind of child who studied tone more than words. Tyler had been 4 when Ethan first started coming around regularly. His biological father lived 2 states away and existed mostly as a monthly transfer and occasional birthday call. Rachel never spoke badly about him. She spoke about him the way people talk about old weather. Something that happened, something that passed. Ethan respected that. He stepped into the role carefully, never forced it, never tried to replace anyone, just showed up consistently enough that trust built on its own. It took almost 5 months before Tyler fell asleep during a movie with his head against Ethan's shoulder, instead of sitting on the opposite end of the couch. Ethan remembered that night more clearly than his own wedding, because trust from a child felt earned. What he never examined closely was why Rachel's first marriage had actually ended. He accepted the summary version people give when they don't want to revisit something unpleasant. They grew apart, too young, different directions. He didn't interrogate it. Everyone deserved a past they didn't have to defend. That generosity would later feel less like kindness and more like negligence. Their first year of marriage felt easy, not perfect. Real marriages never are, but stable in the ways that matter. Saturday grocery trips, movie nights, shared routines that slowly become invisible because they work. Rachel was present then, engaged. She asked about his day and listened to the answer. She touched his arm when she passed behind his chair. Small things. The kind people don't notice disappearing until they're gone. The changes in year 2 came quietly. Later wake-ups. More time at yoga classes she hadn't previously mentioned. A sudden interest in keeping her phone face down. None of it proof, just data points. Individually meaningless. Together, something else. Ethan ignored it because he believed trust meant not investigating the people you love. He would later understand trust could also be fear wearing better language. The story didn't begin with a confrontation. It began on a gray Wednesday afternoon while Rachel was taking a call outside on the patio. Tyler sat at the kitchen island building something complicated out of magnetic tiles, completely absorbed, talking mostly to himself the way kids do when they feel safe. Then he said casually, "Mom's friend Daniel says she looks younger when she laughs." Ethan didn't react immediately. Years of dealing with emergency equipment failures had trained him not to react before understanding the problem. He set his glass of water down slowly. "Daniel?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. Tyler didn't even look up. "The tall guy from stretching class. He helps Mom carry her bag sometimes." Like it was obvious, like adults already knew, like it meant nothing. Then he kept building. Ethan stood there feeling something settle into place inside his chest. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, something organized. That night he didn't confront her. He didn't ask questions. He didn't check her phone. He did what he always did when something didn't make sense. He started observing. Lying awake beside her while she slept, he stared into the darkness and made a decision he would never say out loud. No accusations, no emotional reactions, no mistakes made too early. He would understand the entire situation before he moved a single piece. Patience had built his businesses. Patience would protect him now. He slept maybe 2 hours. The next morning he buried himself in work. Compressor failure at a hotel account. Staffing issue. Supplier delay. Problems he could solve. Solvable problems helped him think. Around lunch, he sent Rachel a casual message. "Which studio do you go to again?" Thinking maybe I should stretch more. Getting old. Her answer came fast. "North River Wellness." "Since when do you voluntarily exercise?" Light tone, normal rhythm, no hesitation. "Maybe trying to impress my wife," he replied. She reacted with a laughing emoji. That was all. That afternoon, Ethan drove past the studio once, not stopping, just mapping entrances, exits, parking flow, information first, action later. 2 days later, Rachel mentioned she had a morning class after school drop-off. Same routine, same tone. Ethan made one phone call after she left. Marcus Reed answered on the second ring. They had known each other since trade school. Marcus now worked as a risk assessor for a logistics company, which mostly meant he spent his life identifying problems before companies admitted they existed. Ethan gave him the short version. Kid comment. Behavior changes. Class schedule. Silence on the line for a few seconds. Then Marcus asked only one question. "What outcome are you preparing for?" Not what you think. Not are you sure. Outcome. Ethan appreciated that. "I'm preparing to not be surprised," he said. Marcus understood immediately. That Friday, Ethan parked across from the studio behind a row of delivery vans. Not hiding, just not noticeable. Rachel's blue crossover was already there. At 9:52, a man walked out. Mid-30s maybe, athletic. Relaxed posture of someone comfortable being watched. He checked his phone and waited near the entrance. At 10:03, Rachel walked out. She saw him instantly. Not recognition, expectation. Her face changed in a way Ethan hadn't seen directed at him in months. Softer, lighter, private. They spoke briefly. She touched his forearm when she laughed. A small detail, a devastating one. Then she got into her car, and this became the moment Ethan would replay later. She didn't start the engine. Instead, she sat there smiling at her phone, typing, reading, typing again. The same expression still there. 11 minutes. He timed it without realizing he was timing it. When she finally drove away, he stayed parked. No following, no scene. He already knew enough. That night, he started recording notes on his phone. Not for court, not for revenge, for clarity. Date, time, behavior. The way he documented mechanical failures before deciding whether something could be repaired. First entry, Friday, 10:03 a.m. Male approximately 35. North River Wellness. She expected him. Physical familiarity present. His voice sounded calm when he recorded it. That scared him more than anger would have, because calm meant this was no longer an emotion. This was strategy. And Ethan Calder had always been very dangerous when he stopped feeling and started planning. Ethan didn't change his behavior. That was the first rule. If you want the truth, you don't apply pressure. Pressure changes outcomes. People become careful when they feel watched. So he did the opposite. He became predictable. That night, he helped Tyler brush his teeth, read 2 chapters from a dinosaur book, and reminded him to pack his science worksheet. His voice sounded normal even to his own ears. Rachel kissed him goodnight like she always did. And Ethan wondered how many versions of reality could exist in one house at the same time. By the end of that week, he had a name, Daniel Harper. He had a location, North River Wellness Studio. He had a face. What he didn't have yet was certainty. And Ethan never made decisions without certainty. Saturday morning, he started where he always started when vetting potential commercial partners. Public information. The studio website listed instructors, 8 profiles, certifications. Bios written in that same polished tone wellness businesses all seem to use. Daniel Harper, age 36, mobility specialist, injury recovery focus, 3 years with the studio. His photo matched the man Ethan had seen waiting outside. Nothing remarkable about him. That bothered Ethan more than it should have. He had expected someone sharper, more impressive, someone he could point to and understand the trade. Instead, he saw someone ordinary. Ordinary made it personal. A broader search filled in more pieces, open social profiles, fitness posts, client transformations, motivational quotes about discipline and consistency, the usual branding. Then something different. A race photo from the previous summer. Charity 10K. Daniel standing beside a woman with the same last name. Wedding rings visible. Tagged, Melissa Harper. Ethan leaned back in his chair. So Daniel had a wife too. That changed the geometry. He didn't act on that information. Not yet. Next, he checked something he had never checked before: their phone records. Rachel had added him to the family plan after they married. Convenience, she had said. One bill instead of two. He had never once logged into the account dashboard. Until now. Patterns appear fast when you know how to look. Repeated number, morning, late morning. Occasional mid-afternoon, not constant, strategic. He scrolled back 90 days. The same number appeared 47 times. Enough to form a habit, enough to form risk. He copied the number into a search database used by small business owners screening unknown callers. Name returned in seconds: Daniel Harper. Ethan closed the laptop and went to work. Inventory check, vendor call, scheduling conflict. From the outside, it looked like an entirely normal day. That evening, he created a folder on an encrypted drive. Not labeled emotionally, not labeled dramatically. Just documentation screenshots, dates, call frequency chart, organized. Emotion lived in one part of his mind. Strategy lived somewhere else. Sunday, Rachel took Tyler to a birthday party. Ethan stayed home and thought about something Daniel's existence forced him to reconsider: how Rachel's first marriage had really ended. That question started with Marcus. Ethan called him late that night, explained what he had found. Marcus listened quietly, then asked, "What version of her divorce did you hear?" "The simple one," Ethan said. Marcus exhaled slowly. "I evaluated a distribution company owner last year. His brother played rec hockey with Rachel's ex." Ethan said nothing. Marcus continued. "Apparently the divorce was efficient. She had documentation ready, financial timelines, communication records. He didn't." A pause. "Meaning?" Ethan asked. "Meaning she negotiated from strength." That stayed with Ethan. Documentation ready, prepared, faster. Monday, Ethan located Rachel's ex-husband through a contractor network contact. Name: Aaron Blake. Ethan sent one message, short, direct. "I'm Rachel's husband. I think we need to talk." He expected no response. Instead, Aaron replied 30 minutes later, "I was wondering when you'd reach out." They met Wednesday morning at a breakfast place off a service road 20 minutes outside the city. Neutral territory. Aaron already had coffee when Ethan arrived. He looked like someone who had rebuilt himself once already. No bitterness in his voice, which somehow made everything he said heavier. "Is she seeing someone at that studio?" Aaron asked. Not surprise. Recognition. Ethan nodded. Aaron stared into his coffee. "Second trainer," he said quietly. "Different facility when we were married. Same pattern, different stage." "I found out late," Aaron continued. "Thought I had time. I didn't. She had everything organized before I even understood what was happening. Legal preparation, communication archives, timeline framing. I paid for not moving fast enough," Aaron said simply. He didn't sound angry, just factual. Before they left, he gave Ethan one piece of advice. "Don't react first, prepare first." Ethan understood immediately. That drive back felt different, not emotional, instructional. That night, his voice memo ran nearly 9 minutes. Pattern confirmed. Prior occurrence. Behavioral consistency. He gave himself 72 hours before doing anything else. 3 days of normal life. School pickup, work orders, morning coffee, performance of routine. Because the greatest advantage in any conflict is being underestimated. Wednesday evening, Ethan and Marcus spoke again. "Then you need something real," Marcus said. "Not suggestive, not circumstantial. Physical evidence. Undeniable." Thursday, Rachel mentioned a morning class in Aaron's afterward, back around noon. Ethan adjusted his schedule. Daniel left the studio at 10:18. Ethan waited 30 seconds before pulling into traffic. Never follow directly. Always leave buffers. Daniel drove south through mixed commercial streets before turning into a low-rise business hotel, the kind used for conferences and traveling sales teams. Ethan didn't feel anger, just confirmation. He parked 2 lots away with clear visibility. Daniel went inside. 10 minutes later, Rachel arrived. She didn't hesitate, didn't check surroundings. She knew where she was going. They entered separately. Professionals. Ethan waited. 43 minutes later, Daniel exited alone. Then Rachel. Spacing maintained. Ethan sat completely still. No photos yet. Not enough. But now he knew where the next piece would come from. And for the first time since this began, Ethan felt something unfamiliar. Not pain, not jealousy, clarity. Because this was no longer suspicion. This was structure. And structure was something he knew exactly how to dismantle. Rachel arrived 19 minutes after Daniel. That detail stayed with Ethan because it felt practiced. Not rushed, not impulsive, not messy. Timed. She turned into the lot slowly, past 3 empty spaces closer to the entrance, and parked near the far edge beside a line of low hedges facing the road. Far enough away that nobody walking out of the lobby would naturally connect her car to his. That was the first thing that made Ethan understand this wasn't new. Not just the affair, the method. He lifted his phone and began documenting everything with the same calm he used when photographing damaged compressor units for insurance disputes. Her vehicle in the lot, the motel sign, the exterior hallway, the room number. Then Rachel herself walking toward the door without hesitation, sunglasses on, tote bag over one shoulder, moving like someone following a route she already knew. The door opened. She stepped inside. The door closed at 11:06. Ethan sat motionless in his truck with the engine off and one hand resting on the steering wheel. He had expected the impact. He had prepared for it. He had spent days constructing the possibility carefully enough that it wouldn't break him when it became real. It still hit hard, not like an explosion, more like a weight dropped straight through his chest. Something final. He made himself breathe slowly. In through the nose. Hold. Out. No scene. No mistakes. No improvisation. He waited. An hour passed. Then more. At 12:21, the door opened again. Daniel came out first. Relaxed posture, no urgency, no scanning the lot. He looked like a man leaving a scheduled appointment. Rachel followed less than a minute later. She was adjusting her hair with one hand and slipping her sunglasses back on with the other. They stood outside the room for maybe 90 seconds, close enough that whatever they said belonged to a private language now. Daniel smiled. Rachel laughed softly and touched his wrist once before stepping back. That touch bothered Ethan more than the motel room, because the room proved the affair. The wrist touch proved comfort. This wasn't adrenaline. It wasn't recklessness. It wasn't one bad choice. This had history. He photographed all of it. Them outside the room. Them separating. Her walking back to her car. The timestamp in the corner of each image. When both vehicles were gone, Ethan stayed parked another full minute and looked through the photos one by one. Clear. Ordered. Precise. No ambiguity. What Aaron Blake had failed to secure, Ethan now had sitting in his hand. From the parking lot, he made one call. Graham Sloan. 3 years earlier, Graham had represented Ethan in a vendor contract dispute involving a refrigeration supplier who thought delay language meant whatever they wanted it to mean. Graham had won without ever once raising his voice. That was exactly the kind of man Ethan needed now. When Graham answered, Ethan said only, "I need to talk to you about a divorce and I need to do it today." Graham didn't waste time asking for details over the phone. He gave Ethan 4:45. Ethan arrived with everything organized before he sat down. Phone records, profile screenshots, images from the motel, chronological notes, dates. Graham went through the material in silence, occasionally asking a short question in the same tone a surgeon might use while deciding where to cut. "How long have you known? Does she know you know? Any shared business interests? Property ownership before marriage?" Ethan answered each one directly. When Graham finished reviewing the photos, he placed the phone on the desk and leaned back. "What you have," he said, "is useful. More than useful, actually. It's structured." That word mattered to Ethan. Structured. Not emotional, not messy. Structured. Graham continued, "In this state, fault can still matter depending on how the filing is framed and what your agreement says. The real question is whether she's already preparing her side." "She is," Ethan said. Graham looked up. "You know that, or you suspect it?" Ethan hesitated only a second. "I know enough to think timing matters." Graham nodded once. "Then timing matters." He told Ethan not to confront her, not to hint, not to shift his behavior in ways that might force her to move early. Give him several days, he said. He wanted to review the marital agreement, property history, and exposure points before anything was filed. Ethan left the office feeling something he had not felt since Tyler's sentence at the kitchen island. Not relief. Relief would have suggested something was over. This wasn't over. But for the first time, it felt containable. That night, he made another voice memo in the truck before going inside. Date, time, hotel, photo count, attorney name, initial legal read. Then he walked into his own house, washed his hands, sat down across from Rachel at dinner, and listened while she told him her errands had taken longer than expected because traffic near the shopping district had been awful. He nodded in the right places, asked one small follow-up question, passed the salt when she reached for it. He wondered, not for the first time, how many marriages actually die long before anyone stops setting the table. Graham called him the following Monday morning. He had reviewed everything: the marital agreement, the property dates, the evidence, the exposure if Rachel filed first, the ways she might try to frame timing, support, and access to household funds. "I want you in my office Wednesday," he said. "There's a clean way to do this, but not if we let her set the pace." That left Ethan with 2 days and one unresolved question still turning in the back of his mind. Aaron Blake had told him Rachel had moved fast in her first divorce, prepared, organized, legally ahead. But Ethan realized he had never asked the most important version of that story. How early had she started planning before Aaron knew he was already losing? So he texted him Sunday evening. One question. "Do you think she spoke to a lawyer before you realized anything was seriously wrong?" Aaron answered 12 minutes later. "I know she did. Found the charge later on our joint card. At the time, I thought it was some admin thing for school paperwork. 3 months before she filed. Family attorney downtown. She was getting ready while I was still trying to fix things." Ethan read that message twice. Then he opened the shared credit card account online and went back through months of statements. At first, nothing. Restaurants, household purchases, school fees, gas, subscriptions. Then farther back, buried between a pharmacy charge and a home goods order, one payment to a firm he vaguely remembered seeing once and ignoring. Hollis and Vane Family Law. The amount wasn't large. Consultation money, planning money. He looked the firm up immediately. Domestic litigation, custody, asset protection, high conflict divorce representation. She had already been preparing, not reacting, preparing. Ethan forwarded the screenshot to Graham with no explanation beyond. "Found this on the joint card, 4 months ago." Graham called 23 minutes later. "That changes the timeline," he said. She was building her position while the marriage was still operational. Operational. There was another precise word Ethan appreciated. "What does that mean for me?" Ethan asked. "It means we move before she thinks you've noticed anything." Wednesday's meeting lasted just under an hour. Graham walked Ethan through the structure carefully. The house was Ethan's from before the marriage. The businesses were premarital assets, clearly documented. Income during the marriage still mattered, but ownership history mattered more. And most important of all, the marital agreement they had signed 2 months before the wedding contained language Rachel had likely treated as background paperwork. Infidelity clause, support limitation, property protections triggered by documented marital misconduct. Graham slid a finger across one paragraph and said, "She either forgot this was here, assumed you'd never enforce it, or believed she'd be the one moving first and controlling the narrative." "She misread me," Ethan said. Graham gave the smallest nod. "Yes," he said. "She did." That evening, Marcus came by after dark while Rachel was supposedly at a book club on the north side of town. They sat on the back patio without turning on the overhead light. The yard was quiet except for a neighbor's wind chime and the distant sound of traffic. Ethan filled him in on everything: the motel, the photos, the lawyer, the consultation charge, the agreement clause, the filing strategy. Marcus listened the way he always did, fully, without interrupting until the structure of the whole problem was visible. Then he said, "So she wasn't just cheating." Ethan looked at him. Marcus went on. "She was preparing an exit while keeping you financially calm. Same pattern Aaron described, same sequencing, same assumption that she'd move before you were oriented." That was exactly it. Not chaos, sequencing. And once Ethan saw the sequence, he could no longer unsee it. After Marcus left, Ethan stood for a long time in Tyler's doorway. The boy was asleep diagonally across the bed, one arm thrown over a blanket, breathing with the deep seriousness children bring to sleep. On the floor beside the bed sat one sneaker upside down and a half-finished Lego truck missing a wheel. He looked impossibly young. Too young to understand any of this. Old enough to feel all of it. That was the part Ethan had the hardest time carrying. Not Rachel, not Daniel, not even the legal fight. Tyler. The law would not care what they had built between them. There was no biological claim, no automatic right, no protected role for the man who had packed lunches, fixed broken toy axles, sat through school pickup lines, and learned exactly how much peanut butter Tyler liked on toast. If the marriage ended, contact with him would exist only if Rachel allowed it. And Ethan no longer trusted Rachel to allow anything that didn't benefit her. On Wednesday afternoon, Tyler came home from school carrying a drawing folded in half. He placed it on the kitchen counter with the solemn pride of someone delivering architecture plans. "That's us," he said. Ethan opened it. Two figures in front of a building with wide doors and circles that were supposed to be tires or fans or maybe both. One tall, one small, blue sky in one corner, crooked windows, red lettering that almost looked like the company sign if you were willing to love it enough. "You gave me too much hair," Ethan said. Tyler grinned. "You're old in the picture too." Ethan laughed despite himself. Then he put the drawing on the refrigerator with a magnet and stood there looking at it longer than necessary. Rachel came into the kitchen a few minutes later, glanced at the page once, said, "That's sweet," and started pulling ingredients out for dinner. That was all. No pause, no real look, no understanding of what the picture had just done to him. Because at Graham's office earlier that day, Ethan had been told one thing with complete legal clarity. The agreement could help with money. It could help with the house. It could help with exposure and timing. It could not help with Tyler. When this ended, Ethan would have no standing to demand custody, or even guaranteed visitation. He would become, in legal terms, almost nothing. A man who had mattered inside a house and then no longer did. That truth sat inside him heavier than the affair ever had. Friday morning, Graham filed. Rachel still didn't know. She left the house the same way she always did lately. Coffee cup in hand, keys between two fingers, distracted goodbye tossed over her shoulder like a receipt she expected someone else to deal with later. Ethan watched from the kitchen window as her car backed out of the driveway and disappeared past the mailbox. Then he opened his phone and recorded another memo. Brief, controlled. No wasted words. Friday, 8:12 a.m. Filing submitted. Agreement clause active. Prior legal consultation documented. She believes she still has initiative. She does not. He stopped the recording and set the phone down. Outside, the morning looked perfectly ordinary. Inside the house, everything felt like the air just before a storm finally decides where to break. And Rachel, for the moment, was still living inside the last few hours of a reality that no longer belonged to her. The honest truth was that Ethan did want to stay in Tyler's life. He just no longer confused wanting something with having any power to keep it. That was one of the hardest parts of the week after the filing. Not the paperwork, not the evidence, not even Rachel's affair, if he was being completely honest with himself. It was the boy. Because the law had 1,000 ways to measure income, property, misconduct, timing, and leverage. But almost none for the quiet bond between a child and the man who had packed his lunches, fixed the loose wheel on his scooter, and learned which cereal he would only eat if the banana slices were cut thin. Graham had been clear. Emotion was not standing. Love was not standing. Routine was not standing. When this was over, Tyler would remain Rachel's son. Ethan would become legally irrelevant unless she chose otherwise. And Rachel was not going to choose anything that made Ethan's life easier once she understood the board had turned against her. That thought hit him hardest late Thursday night after closing the West Side service yard. He sat in his truck for a few extra minutes with the engine off and finally admitted something to himself that he had avoided saying because it felt too cruel to say out loud. He was grateful they had never had a child together. Not proud of the thought, not happy about what it revealed, but grateful. They had talked about having one in the first year of marriage. Rachel had brought it up gently more than once, never pushing hard, just returning to the idea at careful intervals like she was testing a locked door to see if it might open later. Something in Ethan had always hesitated. He had called it timing, stress, business pressure, bad season to add complexity. Now he recognized it as something older and quieter than logic. Instinct. The same instinct that had made him document everything before signing contracts. the same instinct that had warned him against overextending debt when he bought his second service van. Some part of him had been protecting him before he consciously knew he needed protection. Because if they had shared a child, Rachel's strategy would not just have reached into his finances or his home. It would have reached into every future holiday, every school event, every ordinary Tuesday for the next 15 years. Instead, he was 41, with his businesses still legally his, the house anchored by premarital ownership, and an agreement Rachel had signed too casually to survive what came next. Friday evening, he sat alone at the kitchen table while Rachel put Tyler to bed. Her voice carried faintly down the hallway. Calm, warm, easy in the way mothers sound when the room is dim and the day is almost over. That had been part of the problem all along. She was a good mother in the visible ways. She remembered school forms. She showed up to pick me up. She knew how to comfort, how to soften her tone, how to make a child feel attended to. And she was also a woman who had run nearly the same betrayal twice, first on Aaron Blake and now on Ethan, while preparing legal positioning before either man fully understood what was happening. Both things were true. He had spent weeks trying to reconcile them. He stopped trying that night. Some people are not contradictions to be solved. They are complete pictures you do not want to look at all at once. Graham called a little after 8. The process server was ready for Monday morning. Rachel would be reached at the house after Ethan had already left for work, and before she could settle into whatever story she was still telling herself about how much time she had. "You certain?" Graham asked. Ethan looked down at the wood grain of the table and thought about Tyler's drawing still attached to the refrigerator, with a magnet shaped like a peach from a roadside market 2 summers ago. "I've been certain for days," he said. "Do it." Rachel was served Monday morning at 9:18. Ethan knew because Graham texted him the confirmation while he was reviewing a damaged condenser unit with one of his lead technicians. He read the message, typed back one word, "Received." Then he put the phone away and kept walking the floor. Routine mattered. If your mind is carrying too much, routine gives your body a way to move through the weight without collapsing under it. Rachel called him 4 times before lunch. He did not answer. She sent 3 messages. The first asked what the hell was going on. The second accused him of humiliating her. The third was shorter and more careful, which told him fear had entered the room. He read all of them, responded to none. Graham had instructed him to direct all communication through counsel, unless there was a strategic reason not to. Ethan followed that instruction exactly. That afternoon, he did something he had been considering since the moment Daniel Harper's race photo had confirmed a wife existed on the other side of this. He contacted her. Her name was Melissa Harper. Her online presence had the look of a life arranged with ordinary faith. Holiday photos, kitchen renovations, a dog wearing a bandana at Christmas, a husband in the background of enough pictures to suggest consistency. The kind of account built by someone who believed the floor beneath her life was solid. Ethan drafted the message carefully. No threats, no editorializing, no revenge language, just facts. He identified himself as Rachel's husband. He stated that he believed her husband and Rachel had been involved in an ongoing relationship. He included the studio name, the hotel, dates, and 2 time-stamped photos that did not cross into voyeurism, but left very little room for confusion. He wrote one line at the end and rewrote it 3 times before sending, "You do not owe me a response. I only believed you had a right to know what I would want to know in your position." Melissa replied that evening. Her message was short, controlled, clearly written by someone holding herself very still. She asked for the full documentation. He sent it. An hour later, she wrote again. "Thank you for telling me. I'm sorry we're both learning this way." They exchanged only a few more messages over the next 2 days. Ethan did not try to recruit her into anything dramatic. She did not want revenge theater. She wanted the truth in a usable form. So he gave her exactly that. In one of those messages, she told him something that settled in Ethan's mind, like a final piece clicking into place. Daniel had crossed lines before they got married, once in a way she had discovered, and once in a way she had only suspected. She had convinced herself then that immaturity was not the same thing as character. Now she was done convincing herself. Ethan read that and thought of Aaron Blake. Second chances, benefit of the doubt. The human need to believe a painful thing was an exception and not a pattern. Sometimes people did not waste forgiveness because they were broken. Sometimes they wasted it because they learned they could. Marcus came by Tuesday evening. No announcement, no ceremony. Just a knock at the back door and 2 bottles of mineral water because neither of them felt like pretending this was the kind of night that called for beer. They sat outside under the patio light while the neighborhood settled into its usual evening sounds. Sprinklers clicking on, a garage door down the block, someone walking a dog that kept stopping to investigate the same patch of grass. Ethan told him Melissa had replied. Marcus listened, then said, "So Daniel's house is burning too now." Ethan looked out into the yard. "Yes," he said, "just quieter." They sat in silence for a while. Then Marcus asked the question no one else had asked directly. "How are you actually doing?" Ethan considered lying, saying fine, staying tired. Saying some version of functionality that men like him had been trained to use their whole lives. Instead, he told the truth. "Better than I expected," he said, "which I think means I started losing this marriage before I knew I was losing it." Marcus nodded slowly. That made sense. Too much sense. That night, Ethan recorded another memo. Service confirmed. No response from Rachel. Melissa informed. Marcus visit. At the end, he added one sentence he had not planned before he started speaking. "Daniel thought this stayed inside my house. He was wrong." He slept harder that night than he had in almost a month. Wednesday morning, Graham called with the update Ethan had anticipated from the moment he found the family law consultation charge. Rachel had retained Hollis and Vane, the same firm she had quietly met with months earlier. No surprise there. Her attorney had contacted Graham and requested an initial settlement discussion for the following week. They were already signaling support exposure, temporary occupancy arguments, and an attempt to frame Rachel's financial expectations as a lifestyle adjustment issue rather than opportunism. Graham's voice remained flat the entire time, which Ethan appreciated. Panic is contagious. Precision is stabilizing. "She'll push for support," Graham said. "Possibly temporary occupancy in the house, maybe a claim that she contributed to your business stability indirectly during the marriage." Ethan stood beside his truck in the lot behind the service office, one hand on the bed rail, looking at nothing. "And we answer with the agreement," he said. "We answer with the agreement," Graham confirmed. "And with the timing, and with the affair, and with the fact that she sought counsel before disclosure." Everything Rachel had hoped would operate invisibly was now evidence. That evening, Ethan decided he wanted one thing before the lawyers turned the rest of it into paper. He wanted Rachel to hear from his mouth that the story was over. Not to negotiate, not to reconcile, not to shout, just to remove any remaining illusion that this was still a conversation she could steer. Graham advised against it. Ethan listened respectfully and scheduled it anyway. He called Rachel for the first time since the papers were served. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was controlled so tightly it almost sounded detached. "We need to talk," Ethan said. "Tomorrow, house, 6 o'clock. A pause. Then, "Fine." She arrived at 6:02, exactly the sort of punctuality that signaled preparation. Ethan was already seated at the kitchen table. No drinks, no attempt to soften the room. Just a man, a table, and a closed folder resting near his right hand. Rachel sat across from him and started where he expected she would start. Offense. He had blindsided her, humiliated her, escalated things without allowing a real conversation, thrown away a marriage without giving her the dignity of an explanation. He let her finish. Every sentence sounded to him like someone trying doors in a hallway after the exits had already been locked. When she stopped, Ethan opened the folder and placed 3 photos on the table between them. The hotel exterior, her walking toward the room, the door with the number visible. Rachel looked down. For the first time since she sat down, she was silent in a way that did not feel strategic. "Daniel Harper," Ethan said. "North River Wellness. Repeated contact over 3 months. Hotel meeting documented. I know exactly who he is." Rachel's eyes lifted to his. "You followed me." "I did." There was no point denying anything now. Then he added, "I started after Tyler told me a man from your class said you had a beautiful laugh." That landed harder than the photos. He saw it. Not guilt first, disruption. Because the thread had begun in a place she could not manage, could not predict, could not sanitize. She tried the next move quickly. The marriage had been strained. He had been distant. He worked too much. Things had been missing. She never intended for any of this to become what it became. Ethan stopped her with one sentence. "I spoke to Aaron." Everything in her face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough for Ethan to see the old architecture underneath the current performance. "He told me about the trainer before, Daniel," Ethan said. "He told me about the lawyer before he understood he needed one. He told me how fast you moved when he was still trying to repair the marriage." Rachel said nothing, so Ethan kept going. "I also found the consultation charge from Hollis and Vane on our card. Months ago, you were planning your exit while I was picking Tyler up from school and asking what you wanted for dinner." That was the moment her posture shifted. Not collapse, calculation. He could almost see her reordering the board in real time, evaluating what he knew, what he could prove, what Graham likely already had, what the signed agreement now meant in practical terms. Finally, she asked quietly, "What do you want from me?" It was the most honest thing she had said all evening. "I want you to understand," Ethan said, "that this is not anger and it's not confusion. I know what happened. I know the sequence. I know when you started planning. And I know what the agreement says about fidelity." He touched the edge of the photographs with 2 fingers. "Graham is fully prepared to use these." Rachel looked back down at them. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she asked the one question Ethan had been dreading even in victory. "What about Tyler?" The kitchen felt suddenly smaller. Ethan answered carefully. "Tyler is your son. That part has never been in question." Her eyes narrowed slightly, waiting for the rest. He gave it to her anyway. "I would have wanted to stay in his life," he said. "You made that nearly impossible." That was the closest he came to anger. Not in volume, in truth. Rachel left 37 minutes after she arrived. No agreement. No breakthrough, no tears. Which was fine. The conversation had never been about resolution. It had been about demolition. She needed to understand that whatever version of events she had been preparing to control no longer belonged to her. After her car disappeared down the street, Ethan sat back at the kitchen table for another full minute before reaching for his phone. Voice memo. Short, precise. "She knows. The performance ended. From here forward, everything is open daylight." He stopped recording and set the phone beside the folder. The next morning, Graham called with the formal response from Rachel's side. Support request. Argument for temporary occupancy. A claim tied loosely to marital contribution and projected income stability from Ethan's companies. Request for transition time before vacating the property. Ethan sat in his truck outside the East warehouse and listened without interrupting. When Graham finished, Ethan said, "Walk me through the counter." Graham did, methodically, without heat, exactly as hired. The agreement was central. The infidelity clause was central. Premarital ownership was central. The documented timeline was central. Her pre-disclosure legal consultation mattered. The hotel evidence mattered. The repetition of planning mattered. Every move Rachel had made in private was now part of the reason her public position was weakening. By the time Graham finished, Ethan was no longer thinking about whether the marriage could be saved. That question belonged to another month, another version of himself. Now he was thinking only about pressure points, sequence, and survival. Because the confrontation at the kitchen table had not ended the war. It had only ended the disguise. And people are often at their most dangerous in the first moments, after they realize the mask is no longer helping them. By the time Rachel's attorney finally stopped pretending the agreement might disappear, the room had already shifted. Graham told Ethan later that good negotiations often turned on tiny moments, invisible to anyone who didn't do that work for a living. A pause held half a beat too long. A legal pad that stopped moving. A question one side already knew the answer to but asked anyway because they needed to hear how confidently the other side would say it out loud. In this case, the shift came when Graham made it clear that Aaron Blake had signed a declaration and was willing to testify to the pattern. Not the affair itself. The pattern. Prior trainer. Prior concealment. Prior legal preparation before marital disclosure. A repeated sequence mattered. Rachel's attorney went quiet for several seconds after that. Not dramatically, just long enough for the silence to become information. Graham noticed. Ethan noticed. And somewhere on the other side of the table, Rachel noticed too. Aaron had not hesitated when Ethan called to ask. He had not asked for revenge. He had not needed persuading. He had simply said, "Send me what I need to sign." There was no triumph in that exactly. Just the blunt force of a man who had spent years living with the cost of something he had never been able to prove. Finally being given the chance to put truth into a form the system would recognize. That mattered more than Ethan expected. because over the previous weeks he had learned something about how these things actually worked. The law could help, documentation could help, a good attorney could help, but none of it helped men who reacted too fast, trusted the wrong person with the wrong information, or mistook emotion for strategy. Most people break the pattern at exactly the wrong time. They confronted each other too early, spoke too loosely, documented too little, warned the other side before the position was secure. Ethan had done none of that. It was making a difference. 3 days after Graham updated him on the negotiation posture, Daniel Harper called. Ethan almost let it go to voicemail. The number looked vaguely familiar on the first ring. By the second, he recognized it from the records he had stared at for hours. He answered. Daniel's voice carried the strained calm of someone trying to sound reasonable because panic would reveal too much. He said the situation had gotten out of hand. He said he thought they should speak directly. He said he never meant for anyone to get hurt. Then, in the part that nearly made Ethan lose patience, Daniel said Rachel had come to him, not the other way around, as though sequence altered character. Ethan let him finish. Then he said evenly, Daniel, understand this clearly. You called me. This conversation is being recorded. You've just acknowledged involvement with my wife, and I'll be forwarding the audio to my attorney this afternoon. Silence. Not shocked silence. Cornered silence. Ethan could practically hear the man recalculating what version of the call he thought he had been having and what version it had just become. Take care, Ethan said, and ended it. He sat in his truck with the phone still in his hand for a moment, pulse elevated but steady. He had expected something like this eventually. Men who spend their lives assuming they can move through other people's lives without consequence almost always try one last conversation when consequence finally arrives. They call it clearing the air. What they mean is control. Ethan sent the recording to Graham within the hour. Graham replied with one sentence. This helps. Keep the original file. Marcus came by that Friday evening. For the first time in weeks, they sat on the back patio with the light on. No more need for half-dark strategy sessions. The phase of shadows had passed. Ethan told him about Daniel's call. Marcus listened, then shook his head once. He really thought he could explain himself out of this? Some people mistake speaking for repairing, Ethan said. Marcus let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh. What's Graham saying about the timeline? Mediation first, Ethan said. Rachel's side knows the agreement is solid. They know the hotel evidence is solid. Graham thinks this resolves before a full hearing. Marcus nodded. And support? Not if the clause holds like Graham says it will. It would not restore anything that mattered emotionally. It would not solve Tyler. It would not give Ethan back the version of the house that had existed before the sentence at the kitchen island, but it would stop Rachel from turning betrayal into leverage. And right then, that was enough. They sat quietly after that, listening to the neighborhood settle into an ordinary Friday night. A mower somewhere in the distance, a screen door closing, a dog barking twice and then deciding against a third. Ordinary life continuing. That sound meant more to Ethan than it used to. He thought of Tyler. Rachel had been staying with her sister off and on since the filing became real. Tyler was with her. Ethan had not seen him in days. There was no clean explanation for a child that age. Not one that fit in his hands without breaking something in him. What Ethan could do, and what Graham had already advised him to do, was document his willingness to remain in Tyler's life in a formal letter through counsel. Not a plea, not a demand, a record. A clear statement that the bond mattered and that Ethan was not stepping away from it casually. Whether Rachel honored any of that later would be her choice. Ethan would not chase what the law did not give him the power to keep. That night, he recorded another memo. Daniel's call, recorded admission, Graham's response, Marcus on the patio. At the end, he said something he had not known he was going to say until it came out of his mouth. Rachel thought she had chosen the kind of man who would absorb the damage quietly, because fighting back would cost too much. She chose wrong. He stopped the recording and slept better than he had in a long time. Mediation took place on a Tuesday morning a little over a month after service. Downtown office. The conference room was too cold. Bottled water sweating onto coasters no one touched. Rachel sat across from Ethan with her attorney beside her. She looked polished, composed, and carefully assembled in the way people do when they still hope a presentation can recover ground substance that has already been lost. Ethan remembered once admiring that about her. Not now. Now all he saw was effort. The mediation lasted just over 4 hours. Most of it was not dramatic. That was the strange thing about outcomes that matter. They rarely sound like movies when they happen. Mostly it was attorneys and a mediator moving between versions of the same facts until one side had to decide how much losing they could afford. Rachel's attorney started where Graham predicted she would start. Lifestyle adjustment, temporary support framing, time in the house, a soft argument around contribution during the marriage. Then Graham laid out the actual structure, the agreement, the infidelity clause, the phone records, the hotel photographs, the timeline of undisclosed legal consultation, Aaron Blake's declaration. He did not raise his voice once. He did not need to. 25 minutes in, Rachel's attorney asked for a recess. That told Ethan almost everything. When they returned, the tone had changed. Support was off the table. The occupancy argument narrowed quickly. What remained was division of a relatively modest category of assets accumulated during the marriage, made modest largely because Ethan had entered the marriage with clearly documented separate property and had kept his businesses organized with the discipline that once seemed boring to other people and now looked like foresight. By the time the mediation ended, the outline was set. Rachel retained her personal belongings. One jointly purchased vehicle. A settlement amount Graham later described as reasonable, contained, and nowhere near what Rachel had been positioning for had she filed first and controlled timing. They both signed that afternoon. Outside the building, Graham shook Ethan's hand and said, "You handled this as well as anyone could." Ethan thanked him and meant it. 2 weeks later, Rachel's mother called. Her name was Linda Mercer now in this version of the story, though Ethan still thought of her mostly as the woman who always brought store-bought rolls to Thanksgiving and apologized for them before anyone had eaten one. He considered letting it ring out. Instead, he answered. She was quiet at first, the way people are when they understand they are late to the truth and do not know whether they still have the right to speak into it. Then she said, "I owe you an apology." Ethan said nothing. She continued, "I didn't know enough about what happened in Rachel's first marriage. Or maybe I knew enough to ask harder questions and chose not to. Either way, I was wrong." There was no script for that kind of call, no legal value, no strategic purpose. Just a 60-year-old woman saying something difficult because leaving it unsaid had started to cost too much. Ethan thanked her. She asked about Tyler. He said the boy was a good kid, and none of this belonged to him. Linda's voice tightened slightly when she answered, "I know." The call lasted maybe 7 minutes. When it ended, Ethan stood for a while in the service bay office with his phone in one hand and the odd weight of that apology settling into place. It changed nothing. It still mattered. A few weeks after that, Melissa Harper texted. Short message, same as always. Daniel had moved out. She had failed. She and her daughter were doing all right, or at least trying to become the kind of all right people can live inside while something is ending. She thanked Ethan one more time. He wrote back, "Take care of yourself, and take care of your little girl." That was the end of their contact. The West Side Yard posted its strongest quarter since Ethan bought the company. The North Service Division was up year over year. A contractor came out to walk a possible expansion site Ethan had been considering before any of this started, and had postponed only because betrayal is time-consuming in ways nobody warns you about. And now, with the divorce finalized, he found his mind returning to ordinary, ambitious questions again. Square footage, traffic flow, labor coverage, whether the new location made more sense east of the bypass or closer to the industrial corridor. That change in his thinking told him more about healing than any speech could have. A month after everything was final, Ethan met Marcus for dinner at a steakhouse they had been going to since their 30s, the kind of place with dim walls, heavy chairs, and servers who remembered how Marcus liked his potatoes without being asked. They talked about normal things. Marcus's wife, a school fundraiser, a fishing trip being planned for early spring. The county commissioner race neither of them trusted. Near the end of the meal, Marcus set down his glass and looked at Ethan for a second. "Are you really okay?" Ethan thought about lying just out of habit. Then he thought about the quiet in his house lately and how it no longer sounded hollow. "Yeah," he said, "I am." Marcus studied him once, then nodded. He believed him. Because it was true. Ethan still thought about Tyler sometimes, more often than he admitted out loud. He hoped Rachel would let the boy keep some thread of contact with the life they had built. He had done what Graham suggested. The letter was on record. His willingness was documented. The rest was no longer his to force. That was the part he had to learn to live with. Not everything you love can be held by proving you deserve it. Some things are left in other people's hands whether they've earned that power or not. He drove home that night along roads that had become charged with memory over the last several weeks. Past the wellness studio where the first visible crack had formed. Past the hotel exit where suspicion became evidence. Past the old turn toward the house where he used to think stability meant the same thing as safety. When he pulled into the driveway, he sat for a moment with the engine idling and looked at the porch light, the one he had replaced himself 2 winters earlier after the old fixture started flickering. Then he went inside. The house was quiet, not empty. Quiet. There was a difference. He stood in the kitchen for a minute, one hand resting on the back of a chair, and realized he was thinking about the contractor's estimate, the timing of an equipment order, and whether the expansion should be phased in 2 stages instead of 1. Future. That was what had come back. Not revenge, not vindication, not even relief exactly. Future. Some men get hit hard and spend years wandering around the outline of the life they used to have, trying to decide where exactly they disappeared. Ethan had been hit hard too, but he had kept his footing. He had walked through the wreck without handing over what he had spent a decade building. And in the end, that was the lesson the whole thing left in his hands. When you build your life carefully, patiently, with both eyes open, you do not owe its ruins to the person who tried to set the fire. If this story made you feel something, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling us what you would have done in the main character's place, and subscribe to Sinner Stories so you never miss a new video.